Obviously, the war in Ukraine and the crushing of protests in Canada are two separate things. This war is a humanitarian disaster. It is wrong. What I'm saying is that if the reason that this war is wrong, or one of the reasons, is because it is against democratic principles, then you must ensure that where it is possible, where there is no militarized state opposing your ability to be democratic, you should be democratic. Otherwise, you do not have the same argument. You can criticize Russia for many, many reasons. You can condemn the actions of Russia, quite rightly, for many reasons. What you can't do is claim to be an exemplar of democracy if whenever you get the opportunity to be tyrannical, you take it. Let's see what Justin Trudeau had to say about Chinese state authoritarianism in 2014.
He was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China.
Even then, before Justin Trudeau became a sort of figure of loathing as a result of the trucker actions, and I'm sure for other things that I've not been following, he literally, while he's still in his boy band phase, is openly declaring affection for Chinese state authoritarianism.
Because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start, investing in solar.
If only we had a dictatorship. Don't worry, Justin. Future you has got that covered.
Well,
That's
one
a good
point. Which part?
That whole thing.
So the Russell Brand's point, or
Russell Brand's part, no.
or
Russell
Justin
Brand's
Trudeau
part.
saying China is able to implement all of the things that they want to implement extremely fast because they're a dictatorship.
No, that is nonsense.
Well, I mean, it is true.
I guess.
It's true, but the one big thing that kind of stands out on this is that many of us have been talking about the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum, and one of the thinkings about the World Economic Forum and kind of marching us to this new sort of world order is that it seems to be more bringing us towards the Chinese way of doing things, more in that. You don't own your own things necessarily. There's an overarching authority that tells you what to do, but don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You're going to be really happy with it. And what's interesting is that Justin Trudeau is one of those young global leaders that came out of the World Economic Forum. So a lot of people are looking at this and saying, see, this is an example of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset in action, the type of mentality that it breeds into these young leaders that then go on to become leaders of these Western nations that then march us into this authoritarian way of being.
I don't think we even need to go that far into looking for an explanation. Look, people in the government lust for more power, more way to control people, more authority, more bigger government. It's not. I don't think that's an ideology that needs to be like trained into you or educated into you. If when you're in the government, you start thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could make people do this, or I could do this project, or I could order people around. It's just like it's a tendency of the power, how power corrupts.
You're showing that your conservative self says that all liberals are commies.
Well, maybe when you get into the government, all liberals and all conservatives start. I mean, the Republicans spend just as much money when they're in office as Democrats do. Both parties end up starting just as many wars as the other party. Like it's the tendency to expand and do more and control more. It's the position, not the person.
This is extreme, though. This is extreme.
Right, but also the Great Reset was just the name of an annual conference that the World Economic Forum had. The World Economic Forum throws this annual conference in Davos where they get all of the oligarchs from around the world, and they get the leaders from Putin to Xi to Biden to Obama to Trump.
I don't know if Biden was ever. Oh yeah, at the actual forum, but yeah, the young global leaders were.
They've got their little club as well. Right. But Davos is an annual conference of the richest and most powerful people in the world. Every year they give that conference a name. One year they named it the Great Reset.
They also wrote a book. They also have a section of their website. It's also, I think, an ideology that they've been promoting for a long time.
Yes, every year they try to promote their conference in some other way. That year, the founder of the thing wrote a book that he was trying to sling. Like, people selling merch at conferences shouldn't be confused for kind of a kind of global hegemonic.
I still think I think when you go back and you look at all of their ideology, they just finally gave it a name. So it wasn't that, this was just the name of the conference that one year. They finally gave it a title.
How do you have people, so you've got Ukraine, Russia, China, U.S., Turkey, Syria, plus you have Elon Musk, and plus you have Bill Gates, and plus, these people don't agree. Like elites are in conflict with each other for supremacy.
Right,
so
but
how can
this
they
is-
all be colluding toward one single ideology?
Well, for one, I don't, there's a lot of different people that show up to the conference itself, but the global young leaders is that's a grooming ground, a platform where they've brought in a bunch of these leaders like Justin Trudeau, like Jacinda Ardern, who've gone on to then rule countries and rule them, interestingly, very similarly. And we saw this during the pandemic. Their way of going about controlling the pandemic was very similar compared to other places that believe in different values. So, or should be, ideally Australia, Canada, New Zealand believe in certain values. I don't think they showed that during the pandemic. I thought they showed something much more authoritarian and scary. So, but they showed something very, very similar. They led their countries in the exact same way.
Right, but to me, the material conditions produce those outcomes, not conspiracies where people are indoctrinated in a young leadership club.
Well, we didn't really see that here in the U.S. all across the board then. I mean, if that was, a material condition, then we would have seen more, even from the right that did that don't participate, that are not these global young leaders. But instead, you see Gavin Newsom running California in a very similar way. Guess what? Global young leader.
But most big cities controlled by Democrats were run the same way during the pandemic, right?
And many of them were global young leaders. I mean,
and many of them weren't. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't, whether they were global young leaders or not, doesn't matter. What matters is that they were Democrats in position of power.
Right. Whether they were global young leaders through the World Economic Forum or not, they had very similar COVID policies.
But that's also could be just sheep mentality. I mean, once people,
that's
once
the
one
point.
group starts to do it and they say, hey.
What creates the mentality is the underlying structural.
But somebody even has to begin that mentality and feed that mentality. And so if
the structure does it.
Well, it's it's just like the establishment news, right? When they're planting ideas into people and then people just kind of go along with it and every single establishment news outlet starts to parrot the exact same thing over and over and over again. It's easy to then get everybody in the masses to go along with it because they don't want to be the odd man out. Nobody wants to be the last one standing or the contrarian. No one wants to be the contrarian.
But I think
so they just go along.
What you're getting at causes people to maybe think, oh, right, it's these World Economic Forum people or it's these specific people. If we voted in different people, then it would be different because they wouldn't have those same ideas and they wouldn't be tempted by this. And I think that's wrong because what happens is that anyone, or maybe some people are more immune to this kind of corruption, but no, most people slotted into these positions, they will eventually come to wield power in this way because it's so intoxicating and seductive. And so I think we need to actually reform the institutions, make them smaller, break them up, make them have less capacity to harm or control you so that it doesn't matter which person you put in that position because there's only so much that they can do.
So you think that it's just part of the natural human condition that once you get into a position of power, you become this authoritarian dictator? Well, how do you then explain people like Ron DeSantis or any other Republican running in
Ron
any state?
DeSantis is trying to criminalize people from saying the word gay in school right now. Like they just have different types of Republicans or the book burnings or the long history of authoritarianism in the Republican Party. It's different issues. It's not on COVID, thank goodness. I would much rather live under Republican COVID rule than Democratic COVID rule. Don't get me wrong, but there's a similar desire to grab power and force it on people. It's just on different issues.
And wasn't Tulsi Gabbard one of these young leaders?
Yeah.
And she's like a DeSantis type now, right?
That's debatable. I mean, she's still a Democrat and came from the liberal side of things. So
I should say, by the way, I should say on the not literally trying because people say, oh, that's not what the bill says. I have looked at it. It does. No, it doesn't. It's poorly named.
Exactly that.
It does. I think in a worrisome way chill any acknowledgement of same-sex couples
or
up through
opposite
third
sex,
grade
actually.
or opposite. It's a very badly written and confusing bill, but it is not quite the version of you that you get in the mainstream media. It's not quite been characterized. So just want to get that out of the way so I'm not attacked for having spread fake news on that regard.
Yeah, and I agree with Robby. It's not just the human condition. Globalized capitalism creates a series of incentives that draws out the type of outcomes that we see. And I think that explains it. Robby and I disagree on how you would deal with that. But it's not that if you could eliminate Davos, that forum from existing, that you would then have completely different outcomes. You'd have the same outcomes, maybe slightly different people, because maybe Pete Buttigieg doesn't get into the Davos thing, and somebody else does, and so we've got a different Pete Buttigieg as transportation secretary. But the policy would not be different because the incentives created by the system are eventually going to lead to the outcomes that we're seeing.
Yeah, I just think your parents have some sort of an influence on you. So if your parents raise you, for example, with certain morals and values, then you're probably going to be raised with those certain morals and values. And the same thing happens when you're a global leader and you're being groomed by one big entity that basically says to you, I'm going to give you power, I'm going to give you prestige, I'm going to give you connections, I'm going to help you. I mean, the fact that so many of them have been able to rise up into positions to lead countries and be some of the youngest leaders around the world of those nations is astonishing.
But they don't have the same values. So it's like having 30 different. It's like having 30 different parents, from Elon Musk to Xi to Putin. Like, so which parent are you listening to? Like, it doesn't.
I think a lot of them seem to emulate China. And now you've got Justin Trudeau on
Well, that's
camera
a different conspiracy then. Let's say that China then runs the world. Like, that's not Davos. Like, yes, they attend Davos.
That's where I think so it goes deeper than that. So it's not just these Davos people, but a lot of people believe that is actually connected to China and funding from China and implementation of a mentality coming from China to try to influence Western way of thinking in a very subdued and even subconscious way to get us to go along more with their way of running the world.
I mean, I think they're influencing us in a very non-subconscious way, in a very conscious, deliberate way, right? They're saying these are the cultural products you must produce if you want access to our markets. No criticism. Like, they're being upfront about it. It's not insidious. It's stated.
Or maybe they're doing it in multiple layers.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, they send representatives to Davos.
They do.
The only other thing that I thought of interest in the Russell Brand clip, so I thought he was making a good point in general. Like, we're condemning Russia for this behavior, but
you got to live your values.
You have to live, civil liberties if we're so concerned about what they're doing. But there's a kind of obsession with democracy, though, that I don't always necessarily share. Like, democracies can do bad things, or bad policies can be arrived at democratically, right? So it's not. I think democracies often produce better policies than the alternative government arrangements, but it's not perfect.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people could get together and decide to do a really bad thing.
Right, they could kill Kim. We could all vote.
Well, the two of you right now might be voting on that.
Right now, we're voting against the World Economic Forum panic that so this is a good example.
Right.
Well, we'll have more Rising after this. Stick with us.
And hopefully I'll be there.